What does it mean when I say the void is where you lose all psychological and social anchors, and how do we get our bodies involved in that process? Hi, I'm Britt Hartley. I'm an atheist spiritual director with a master's degree in theology, and I focus on existential crisis and the void. So, when you're born, your brain is mostly formed outside of the womb. We are born into the matrix of whatever our environment is. We grow up and we're given a name. We are a person. We grow an identity of things that we like and we don't like. We're told to make good choices and that you have the power to choose. Often we have stories about what happens after we die. We're told to find meaningful work. We're taught some kind of right and wrong, some values. We listen to songs about love and soulmates, and we hope that one day we'll find our person. And we're shown how the world functions. These are all anchors that are very healthy for us as we grow up. So some people comment that the only reason that I experience the void is because I come from religion, and that if I hadn't have come from religion, then it wouldn't have been such a crisis. And while religion can certainly exacerbate your trip to the void because you're building a life on a God that doesn't exist, it doesn't mean that only ex-religious people experience nihilism. We are all born into some matrix of reality, one that is an illusion at some level. And so, what happens in the void is you lose a lot of these anchors that you developed as you were growing up. You realize that there is no God. Gods are just projections of our subconscious needs and fears. There's no religion that we can say is true with any amount of certainty. No afterlife story is truly compelling. You realize that no one actually will ever fully understand what it is like to be you. You are the only person who is experiencing what it is like to be you. You lose free will and realize that your decisions are mostly made in the dark of your attention, and you didn't choose to become the person who would choose X over Y. You lose a sense of self because the self is just a shortcut of the brain. It's an illusion that you can quite easily dissipate. And maybe there aren't soulmates, just other really messed up people who also have wiring for social behaviors because of evolution. And morality begins to break down because really, what is the morality of a lion killing a zebra? And at the end of that road is nothingness. So people report to me that they feel like the floor dropped out from underneath them and they're not standing on anything. They'll report feeling like you're floating in space without a handhold. A lot of our art around the void is just this space, like this expansive space, and not being able to know if you're up or down, not having any kind of handhold. People will talk about depression and not being able to function because they just become absolutely paralyzed in the chaos because you can't make a decision. There's no sense of up or down in the void. And on top of that, you're totally alone in it. So you don't even get the privilege of being able to lay in bed and try to figure this out because you have to get up and pretend to play human and go to a job that you probably don't care about. And maybe you find some ways to numb yourself and not think about it, but it's this constant presence of existential anxiety. And so therapists can help in this space, but there is a difference between a physiological desire to die because of a mental or emotional state or trauma and having no philosophical reason to live. Those two are different. And if you got into the void because more of the second one, you don't need a therapist and just, coping mechanisms, although they always help. What you need more of is a philosophical counselor or existential therapist or Jungian analyst, someone trained in the complexity of these kinds of questions. I had a friend describe it to me as being on a train and the bridge is out. And you know that the bridge is out. You know that all of this is ultimately meaningless and we're all going to die. And you want to scream at everyone on the train, people who are just worrying about how their hair looks, that the bridge is out. And they look at you like you're crazy. And there's some guy on the train saying, I challenge you to a game of checkers because I'm the best at checkers and I'm going to be the best checker player ever. And you want to blow your brains out because it's like, the bridge is out. Why the hell are you talking about checkers? This is so dumb. The bridge is out. Do you not see it? And then you sit and realize that you can't get this train off the tracks. So what do you do while you're waiting to fall off the bridge? And you find yourself going to play checkers, but it's different now. You are intentionally sitting down to play checkers with full awareness that the bridge is out, and your checkers partner is totally oblivious to it, and you're just sitting and playing checkers anyway. Now, if you want to be in that scenario, the kind of person that wants to know, then you were born with truth as a high moral value for reasons that you didn't choose. And others with different core values, like loyalty, may not actually want to know, since you both just end up playing checkers anyway. So when the people around you think you're crazy with your void thoughts, a lot of times I find that people with compassion don't even want to convince others that their anchors are illusions because you're not sure if they would survive the void anyway. And so, out of love, you let them have their security blankets and their anchors of illusion because you don't want them to end up in the void with nothing, which is where you are. And then isolation sits in. And so that's when we can talk about if someone's fighting for their beliefs, if you're trying to explain this to someone, their subconscious may be actually saying, I think these truths you are telling me would destroy me at some level. So I actually don't consent to receiving this information. Now, they won't actually say that. They'll say, I feel sorry for you because you're going to hell. But at some level, our subconscious can sense the things that would unravel us psychologically, that would unravel our identity and our belonging and our entire worldview. And it's the ego's job to protect us from those things. So not only will most people not understand you, but out of compassion, you have to recognize that they were born with a different set of core values and they might not actually survive the void. So you keep the void to yourself out of love for the people around you, and you suffer alone with no one, with nothing, just for many people, just waiting to die. Or for me, when I was at the worst of it, just playing this character, Brittany, just putting on my clothes and putting on this identity because other people cared about it. But I was so checked out and dissociated, I could not give a shit about anything. And when you're with nothing in that place of the void, all the tools can just sound like someone saying, here's a piece of candy, and you're just laying there with multiple gun wounds. Which leads us to today, tool number 2. We have to fully feel this and feel the void in order to move through it. And this is where I see so many people get stuck. Because if you are a truth seeker and an intellectualizer, you came to realize that the bridge is out because you were the one reading books about whether or not you have free will. And you were asking tough questions about God and religion. And it is those kinds of questions that probably led you into the void in the first place. You had a high value. This isn't all the ways to the void, but I've seen this tendency that there's a high enough value for truth seeking that it won over other values like loyalty to your tribe. And so intellectualizers often don't do this just because they're smart. They do that because being logical and being rational feels safe. And somewhere in their development, their emotions, their subconscious, their body either felt foreign or unsafe. For me personally, it was a mother wound. And um, my mother that, I have a mother wound. And with my father, the philosophical discussions with my father felt a lot safer. So in my 20s, I would have said, oh, I just like philosophy. But in my 30s, I realized, oh, I'm here because I have a mother wound and rationality feels safe to me because my mother's emotions felt really unsafe. And this is where we get stuck, because if you don't have any voice for the irrational part of you, your nervous system, your inner child, your body, your psyche, then essentially what you're trying to do is deal with the death of your entire family by only reading books on grief and reading philosophy on grief and never having any feelings. Like, you can do that, but those messages will not fully sink in because we are not fully rational creatures. We are far more emotional than we are rational. So before we dive into Camus and Nietzsche and existentialism and absurdism and all the isms that we're going to go into that can help, first we need to go to the funeral. And because intellectualizers are essentially heads on top of bodies, like your body is just the thing that drags your head from room to room, this can be very hard. And this is why I see so many clients in the void who are still stuck ruminating about death and suffering in the abyss, and they can rationally say things about it, but they don't feel it. They're not moving through it. And so I had to learn how to return to my own body. And I really hated that I had to do this because in my ignorance, I felt like this is a philosophical problem that requires a philosophical solution. And while we can delve into all the tools and shifts of perspective that can help, I realized that I couldn't fully go there until my full self grieved what I had lost. You lose yourself, your connection to others, your sense of truth, your sense of meaning, your expectations of what you thought the world was or could be, your anchors of safety. You lost everything. The void strips you down naked. And how silly us intellectualizers are by thinking we can think our way through it and think our way out of our thought loops without first going to this funeral. So here are some ways that I recommend for getting into your body. None of this is magic. None of this will be new to you, but it may be new in the sense of thinking how it can help you through the void, because you may not have thought that your body has something to say about this that hasn't had a microphone yet. I certainly hadn't considered that when I was in my time in the depths of the void. So the first one is to try a writing activity. And so what you do is you have your right hand, or your dominant hand, write the intellectual side of you. I know that you can create, in the lack of meaning, that people can create meaning. Maybe that's something that you have learned and something that you like to say. But the left hand, try writing out what actually feels unfair about that, the feeling about that without intellectualizing. And the feeling may be like, fuck the universe for creating me in such a way that I could ask questions that have no answer. I'm so mad at the universe for not being different than what it is. I'm so upset that suffering was so much more rampant than I thought it was when I was a child. I'm so upset. Whatever your feelings are around the void, whatever, even if it's irrational, even if it sounds silly or childish, you need to give voice to the part of you that feels like this is really unfair, and that you can imagine a universe better than this, and it shouldn't have been this way. Even though it is, and rationally you can say like, oh, it is what it is, I'm not going to fight against reality. Your body still needs to say that. Your irrational psyche feeling side of you needs to say, this is unfair and it shouldn't have been this way, and I can imagine a world where it's not this way. And for me, I was mad at the universe for, one, that piece of having me be able to ask questions that had no answer, but I was also really mad that the universe gave me this sense of a love of story, and that I'll never know how the story ends. Like, I had to grieve that, and it sounds silly. Like why are you so depressed? And it's like, well, I'm really sad because I really love stories, and the fact that I don't know how this story ends, my own personal story and also the story of humanity, and I don't know how it ends or if it had any meaning, and I don't know what the last chapters of the story are, that really bothers me. Now that may seem silly to say out loud, but my body needed to say that because it needed to fully feel and be able to process that out so that I could move forward to all of the tools that could help. Another option is just creativity. Try and create something that represents how you feel. What color is it? Give it a canvas, write a poem about it. There are a lot of people who explore the void through art, and I've been very touched by their paintings, and I can look at it and know what they were feeling. Sometimes it's physical, it'll be someone kind of floating in space, but then sometimes it'll just be like colors on a canvas that evoke a feeling in me. And this is how someone was processing their own feelings. Go to a rage room, name everything that you thought the world was. Like, I thought that I had a self. I thought there was truth. I thought there was God. I thought there was religion. I thought I was going to find my soulmate. I thought that love was real. I thought whatever your anchors were. And I'm mad that these anchors don't exist in the way that I thought it was. And it's unfair and it sucks. And I'm mourning it, and smash it, smash each thing. For some people, it's really listening to stories and myths and archetypes. This can especially be visual people if you're someone who's drawn to kind of the tarot side of things, where you really find your subconscious voice through story. Some of it can be story, just auditory story. I tend more towards that. If you're more visual, maybe it's something more visually in a story. But walking while listening to a podcast like This Jungian Life, that really dives into story and mythology and archetype, where it can name and give language to different parts of your psyche that haven't had a voice and haven't had a microphone. And you get to have that experience when you're listening to a podcast and you're like, oh my God, that's me. Or that story about Chiron and Greek mythology. And there's one up here on my shelf of Sisyphus. Oh, I understand that. I'm resonating with that. And then you're walking and you're actually being able to process those feelings out. Some prefer rituals where you write out everything that is unfair, or all the ways that you're grieving, all the ways that the world was different than you thought it was, all the ways that you could imagine the world being better and it's not, all the things that you feel are unfair, and actually take it out to a fire and do a burning ritual. Rituals are scientifically proven to help us process emotions out of our body. It's not just woo, it's science. A great book for that is Small Creatures Such as We by Sasha Sagan. She does a lot in the science of rituals. She's the daughter of Carl Sagan. In my own book, I also have a chapter on rituals and how this can really help our body get involved with processing. Psychedelics is something that we can use as a tool here to help turn off are the conscious default mode part of our brain, the one that's stuck in thought loops, and get back into our subconscious and our body and other things that are needing our attention under the surface of our experience. Psychedelics were really helpful for me in being able to better name what was scaring me about the void, what was so the fear that I couldn't quite name yet, which for me was actually the fear of boredom. I was afraid that if there was no truth, then life would be too boring to live, and then I would leave my children motherless. I could not verbalize that fear. It was such a subtle fear, and one that I'd never heard of before, that I couldn't name it until I had some psychedelics help me with that, and a guide help me with that. But also crying out what was lost. And sometimes psychedelics can help us just grieve and get into our body and be able to process out what was lost, which is why people can sometimes call it 10 years of therapy. On my first guided experience, I felt what it was like to be a little kid again, where I was just curious in all directions, which is how I was as a child. And it was very playful, and I wasn't depressed anymore. And it was just so like, look at this and let me taste this. And I know with my guide, I was asking my guide, hey, ask me to spell something because I want to see if I can spell. Ask me what's in the Declaration of Independence. And I was just really curious in all directions. And it was just very light and joyful. And then as I was coming out of the trip, it's essentially that curiosity eventually led to questions that led to answers that were hard and harsh truths about reality. And it felt like I grew up in a space of 10 minutes because I was in this childlike space. And then all of a sudden, as I was coming out of it, it was like, whew, the weight of the existential crisis that I was carrying because it happened all at once. It was so overwhelming. And I just essentially fell to the floor in a fetal position and cried while my guide held me, just deep, deep sobs. Now, it's not fun. Like, neither of those were a party. Like, neither of those were totally enjoyable at the level of experience. But the next day, I felt better. I felt like I had processed. I felt like I was ready to move forward more to the tools that could help because I had finally deeply mourned what I had lost and come into contact with how much I had lost. And also, I was better able to name my fears that were holding me back from moving through this space. So, finding a mushroom soup guide in your area that can help you with some of that can help to speed up that process. So, try a few of these and see if your body can find its microphone, so to speak, so that all the therapy and tools and paradigm shifts can start to sink in. Until you have a funeral for what you have lost in the void, you cannot stop the rebuilding process. Have the funeral, and then we'll learn how to cope with it. For more on the void, existential crisis, philosophy, religious deconstruction, and tools for the good life, visit no nonsense spirituality.com for courses, coaching, and more resources.